today, we want to just briefly follow up on some of the Hermetica. We just two last ideas from book 16. And notice, book in ancient terms means any complete text. I mean, it could be short, like we've got the Book of Jonah, 4 chapters, right? It can be long. We would often say essay rather than book in modern terms, but just the medieval and ancient people used it in that way. First idea is the issue of nominalism. That is, words have in themselves the energy of the objects of which they speak. Okay? This is an idea that language has actual, almost physical, but real connection with the words they describe. Now, in modern terms, we think of language as just kind of arbitrary sounds and symbols and stuff that we make up and we can modify, and they shift through time and all that type of stuff. Anciently, they understood that happened. But there was generally a sacred language which had, in that language, there was a pure connection between the thing described and the word to describe it. And this is a common assumption of lots of different esoteric systems. So it's called nominalism, the idea that names have power. They aren't arbitrary sounds. The other one is that Egyptian is a sacred and pure language. So for the Hermeticists, Egyptian is the sacred language, and Greek is a language of distortion and unclarity. That's generally how ancient esotericists viewed languages other than the core or sacred language. Okay, so notice this indicates that the Hermetica is not product of a Greek. We wouldn't say that about Greek, but is product of an Egyptian that is eventually translated into Greek. However that happened, we don't really know the process, but that's what seems to be behind this. The other one is demonology. We talked about this a little bit, but notice that there's good and evil demons. They have authority over the things of the earth. So there's demons, and in some ways, the difference between a demon and a god is kind of vague, but gods tend to be celestial beings that only exist in the heavens, and demons can operate on earth as well. And they're kind of under the gods, that is, they're sub-beings. But they control nature, cities, nations, individuals, and they can also go inside your body. And it describes them as causing illness and madness and twisting your soul. Okay? This should be carried off as spoils, both souls and bodies. And with our bodies as their instruments, that is, they kind of possess somebody, becomes a demonic person. The demons govern this earth. So this idea is actually also reflected in Christianity, where Paul calls Satan the god of this earth, right? Remember in Paul. I mean, he means Zeus, right? Zeus is the god of the earth. And Zeus is the equivalent of Satan. That is, the demons or the gods of the pagans are demons. And you see this where they talk about Beelzebub. Christ talks about Beelzebub as a demon, and yet he is a Canaanite god, Baal, right? Yeah?
So you said that the demons can be good and evil.
Yeah.
When did they become strictly evil?
That tends to be a Christian interpretation of Greek demonology. They're all evil. But in a sense, we talked about this last time. In a sense, angels, Christian angels would be called demons by pagan Greeks. They are the good demons. Christian demons would be called evil demons by the Greeks. Does that make sense? So that they fulfill, at least in practical terms, the role that angels do in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Okay, so, and I've got that, the topic from last time, I've got recorded, but I haven't posted it yet, so I'll get it up there so you can, because you missed last time, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do a quick review of Goodrick Clark here. And what we want to do is try to understand the idea of Rosicrucianism. Now, we're getting in now into the 17th century, and we're going to stop here with this topic, and then just look just at Judaism, then just at Christianity, just at Islam, and the mysticism and esotericism and those movements. And and then at the end kind of come back to the 17th century and pick it up a little bit. But Rosicrucianism is an interesting movement in lots of different ways. It appears as a sequence of pamphlets called the manifestos, which just means something that you put forth with your hand, and they're discussed by Goodrick Clark. So you can take a look at those, and he gives you places where you can find translations. Basically, these manifestos appeared anonymously and declared a kind of a story of this guy named Christian Rosenkreuz, which Rosenkreuz means the rose cross, possibly just the red cross, or possibly a rose and a cross. And what it was proclaiming is there is a pan-Sophy, there is a super wisdom that encompasses all other forms of wisdom, and esoteric Christianity is part of this pan-Sophy. Pan means all, and Sophia means wisdom, so it's the uber wisdom that kind of encompasses everything else. Okay? Now, this Christian Rosenkreuz went on a mission to recover lost esoteric knowledge, and he wandered around in Arabia and different places and talked to all these kind of secret gurus or secret teachers, and then wrote. They actually didn't write these. These are written by. Most people think they're written by this guy named Andrea, but they don't profess to be written by Rosenkreuz, but they tell his story. Okay? And basically, the theme is that there is lost knowledge. This is a common theme of the Renaissance, because in reality, there was lots of lost knowledge that they were discovering. I mean, this is perfectly practical. There's also lost esoteric knowledge, not just knowledge about literature or philosophy or whatever. There's lost esoteric knowledge, and that there are secret esoteric groups that are transmitting this knowledge. Now, the reality is there probably were secret esoteric groups, and we don't know about them because they were secret. We see evidence of them in different ways. So there's lost knowledge, but there are secret groups that kind of have preserved this knowledge. And sometimes they'll meet with other people and either invite them in the group or maybe teach them some of the knowledge. Now, it's also highly philosophical language and allegorical. So it doesn't just sit down and say, okay, this is the way the cosmos is. It tells these philosophical stories. That's what the Rosicrucians were doing. Okay? Now, an important phenomenon of this is the invention of printing. Printing takes esoteric books that were originally manuscripts that you had to actually meet the guy and let him give you the manuscript, and turns them into printed books that can be transmitted without connection to without a physical connection to the author. In the old days, if you wanted to study with Plato, you studied with Plato. You went and found him and he taught you. Or you studied with one of his disciples who had studied with Plato, or maybe a chain of 7 or 8 guys whose earliest master had studied with Plato. Do you see what I mean? There was a connection. There was a intellectual heritage from teacher to disciple, who becomes a teacher and has disciples. Printing changes this. It allows people to have contact with esoteric knowledge and any other type of knowledge. I mean, it's not just esoteric, but for our purposes, esoteric knowledge that without having a master teach you, you can learn it from books now. And it is publicizing esoteric knowledge. Whereas esoteric knowledge used to be hidden and just within a small group, now it's becoming public. So it's changing the social dynamic of esotericism in esoteric societies. And essentially, printing did to esotericism in the 16th century what the internet is doing to it today. I don't know if you follow esoteric societies today, but there's a whole bunch of these groups. They have tons of web pages in there, make all sorts of claims. And, there's one guy in all of Utah Valley that likes this. In the old days, he would have just been one crazy guy that was out on his own. But now he can have contacts in Australia and England and New York and whatever, and they form an internet group. Okay, and so essentially any group, even if it's just a few dozen people, can can form an esoteric society. In the old days, that would have been a group of actual people that had to meet to do this. Printing shifts this more. Does that make sense? Now, what is the story told about the Christian Rosenkreutz? Is that he was a wandering sage. He's in search of esoteric knowledge. He finds this esoteric knowledge. And this esoteric knowledge can be in the form of manuscripts, inscriptions, and also artifacts like strange objects that contain some type of esoteric knowledge in them. And an interpretation of art, like artistic symbols, can be esoterically interpreted. Does that make sense to everyone, what we're talking about here? So that's what this story is about. And it's also a matter of finding a esoteric master. That is, these guys don't publicize themselves. Today, all these guys claiming esoteric lore publicize themselves and try to get people to buy their whatever or come to their meetings or whatever. Back in the day, the esoteric masters stayed hidden, and you had to search them out. The true ones could only be found after you kind of really proved that you really wanted to meet them for 20 years, and then they might, meet you. So the finding of a hidden master, it becomes an important theme in esoterica. Now, for Christian Rosenkreutz, he wandered, he found the lost knowledge, he found the hidden masters, went back, built a big tomb vault, and in it he kind of hid some of his books and some of his esoteric lore in this tomb, which was then discovered again 150 years later by the Rosicrucians, who took his writings, this is the story they tell, and kind of published them or published his ideas. Now, this gets picked up by a number of different individuals, like these guys are kind of post-Rosicrucian guys. The Freemasons claim all sorts of connections with them. And then in the 18th and 19th century, there was a whole bunch of neo-Rosicrucian movements. And ultimately, the Golden Dawn, which is a magical order of the late 19th century, they pick up all sorts of Rosicrucianism. So the thing here is that it seems that there actually wasn't a Rosicrucian society at all. It seems to have been a philosophical allegory, okay, that later people interpret as literal and then start forming Rosicrucian societies, which in fact aren't the original because there was no original. So it is a mythos that turns into a reality. And today there's a Rosicrucian society down in California. They have a pretty cool Neo-Egyptian temple down there, and all sorts of stuff. What's it called? Amcor or something? I can't remember what they're called, but I'll find it out and I'll send you the link if you want to look for it. Anyway, so lots of these themes become major themes in lots of later movements, even though they may or may not have a connection to the original manifestos or original Rosicrucians.
So,
yes?
do we know if he even existed, Christian Rosicrucian?
Well, most scholars think he didn't. That this guy named Andrea was writing philosophical allegories. This was in fact a not uncommon phenomenon in the age. He just happens to write it in this esoteric vein. So most scholars think he's a made-up figure, he's an allegorical figure, and we are supposed to search for, the lost knowledge and form a universal mankind. This is about forming a universal brotherhood that transcends religious conflict and sectarianism. That's part of what's behind this, which I forgot to mention. But that was kind of the goal, was to transcend Protestant versus Catholic, make everybody united under this new super wisdom. And in fact, of course, it failed miserably because it just created another sect to squabble with everybody about. Now, this book tells you kind of the New Age mythic history of the Rosicrucians. And these two books are more scholarly about, what we would call the real history of the Rosicrucians. So this one's interesting because it gives you kind of the mythos behind it. Okay? Now, any questions on that? Yeah?
Andrea, distanced himself from esotericism later in his life, correct?
Well, he probably wasn't intending to form a society or be an esotericist. He was probably interested in this allegory of like the alchemical wedding is about the unities of opposites, using alchemical symbols to describe how the soul can be purified and society can then form kind of a utopian brotherhood, that type of thing.
So you probably didn't realize how popular it is.
No, I don't think it doesn't seem that he was intending to form a secret esoteric order. He was intending to tell these allegories to kind of make people want to transcend sectarianism and stuff like that. Now, we don't know for sure that Andrea wrote these. This is the general assumption, but they are anonymous and it's not certain who wrote them. Anything else? Okay, yeah.
Sorry, are we going to talk about Freemasonry much, or is this
That's right now. We're going to kind of stop there, go through Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and then we'll come back and discuss Freemasonry near the end. The last couple of weeks are about kind of stuff after. So, but we're stopping the historical progress at this point, and then we're going to go into depth on the three great traditions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam. Okay. Now, let us finish up on the occult. We started this last time, and then I got sidetracked to the Hermetic stuff, and now we kind of got to come back. I think where we left off, we were talking about actual practices, amulets, gems. There's this thing called, you wear these around your chest, on your fingers, in your hair. I mean, all sorts of different ways you could wear these amulets. And these gems were gemstones that in and of themselves had a value. It's crystal stuff in New Age stuff that, if you have a sapphire, it makes you happy or something. So the belief in gems in that way, but they'd also mark the gems with arcane symbols that brought more power. And then these incantation bowls are little bowls that they would write in them in circular form a spell. They'd turn it upside down in the doorstep, and it would trap any evil spirits in the bowl, and then they couldn't enter the house.
Did you have to keep that at the doorstep?
Yeah, you buried it under the doorstep, like you buried it underground, and then built a house on it. So there's a whole bunch of these that survived. I actually found one in Jerusalem near in a shop near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It was $500 for an Aramaic incantation bowl. I wanted to buy it, but I figured I don't really have $500 to spend on that. But there's lots of weird stuff I want to buy, but I never do. Love potions. Love was a big deal. You got to get your girl, and today, you do stupid things on Facebook, and you do what is it? Jackass 1 through 3 or whatever. For some reason, boys think girls will be haven't you heard of those movies where these guys do all sorts of weird, like Darwin Award craziness?
Yes, I've heard of
It's probably just as well. But what I'm saying is that those techniques of attracting attention fail as miserably as the love potions. But the goal was to get some way to attract whoever you want, a girl or a boy or whatever, to be attracted to you. And you would use potions that they would drink or charms and different things. So, love magic. That was a big deal. Fortune telling. People were really concerned about the future. They had lots of anxiety. And so you would foretell the future through magical means. Dreams were a very big part of this. We call it, a lot of these things are divination, that is, trying to foretell the future. And in part, it was to avoid bad things that were about to happen. Okay? Then there's necromancy, which is raising the spirits of the dead to gain some type of special knowledge from them. The dead were believed to exist in a spiritual realm that was different than ours, and they had access to knowledge we don't have access to. So could the angels and the demons. They could give you that type of knowledge as well. So there's necromantic chapters in the Aeneid and in the Odyssey, where both Odysseus and Aeneas go to the underworld and seek out a dead prophet to give them esoteric knowledge, secret knowledge they need. Lots of what's going on here is cursing. So you would basically do good magic for yourself, or maybe your friends and family. Like you'd make an amulet and put it on your child to protect them from the evil eye being evil spiritual power of some sort. And you can still see this all over the Middle East. How is it reflected in Israel today? How do you see it?
Hamza.
What's the Khamsa?
The hand of, I don't know.
The hand of Fatima?
Or Fatima
With an eye in it, often.
Yeah.
And the Jews have exactly the same thing, only it's a different.
They just say it's the hand of Sarah.
Yeah, but I mean it's exactly the same thing. So it's a hand amulet that protects you from evil. You'll see them hanging in cabs and on walls and stuff. So I mean it still goes on in terms of protection spells and stuff like that. Cursing magic was considered evil. It's maleficia. It's black magic. It was forbidden by law. People practiced it anyway. There's a lot of lead tablets on which they scratched the curse, and then they would poke it or bury it or nail it somewhere, and that would kind of send the curse. And there are voodoo dolls, which are essentially images that you get something from that person, put it on it, and it will infuse the spirit of that person into this thing, and then you smash it or burn it or stab it. Using wax for this was very common, but there are also clay ones and different things you could do. So what you could do is a magician would make these little clay images or wax images, sell you one, you'd buy it, and then you'd put a piece of hair from whatever and send a curse to it. There's this TV series called Rome that was on a few years ago. It's in some ways it's really good. It's got lots of sex and violence in it, so it's problematic in some ways. But there's a scene where Brutus's mother does a defixione, that's the lead tablet. She's cursing, I can't remember who, Octavian's mother or something. I mean, it's exactly what would have happened there. So, it's pretty authentic in some of those aspects of it. Then there's astrology and alchemy, which we're going to be talking about later. They were all considered part of this magic phenomenon. Now, behind all of this, those are practices, types of things that they do. Behind all of this is the idea that there are gods, and the gods are basically beyond ordinary people. They're not going to interact with ordinary people. They might listen to the emperor or something, but Zeus doesn't care about me. But there are lesser spirits that I can interact with. And so the role of the magician was to get the lesser spirits, the demons we've been talking about, okay? And they would try to get them to do their bidding. Now, demons will do your bidding for all sorts of different reasons, but sometimes you make an offering. Sometimes in the Faust legend, it becomes selling your soul, trade your soul for demonic power, right? But generally, they wanted worship, they wanted offerings and things like that. So if you could get a spirit or demon to do your bidding, then it could practice magical stuff. And this idea, it's called spiritual magic, that is magic based on spirits. It continues on up to the present day. I belong to a Facebook group called, what's it called? Solomonic Grimoires or something like this. And these guys are talking about, I raised this spirit and he told me this, and I'm trying to do a cleansing, and these, I just kind of looking to what they say because, these are still practicing these old practices in modern form. And they argue about all sorts of stuff that, just like we argue in high priest meeting about whether the word of wisdom allows sugar or not. Sympathetic magic means that there are certain things that are attracted to one another. And if you have that thing, it will attract good power or bad power or whatever. This could be metals, gems. Times and places have there's a certain time where Mars is ascendant, they'll say. That is, it's a good time for warfare. There's a certain time when Venus is ascendant. That's a good time for love or fertility or planting your crops or whatever. Okay? There are rituals and there are objects, words, and rituals that you can do that either summon this natural power, by which we call natural magic or sympathetic magic, and summon the spirits, which we call spiritual magic. So there's kind of two magics. One is spiritual, where you get the spirits to do things for you, and one is natural, where there are just natural things that occur that you can control. Now, an example of natural magic would be taking an herb and drinking it, and it would cure you of a sickness or cause your lover to love you or whatever. Another example might be to wear a golden amulet that would draw down the powers of Jupiter or something on. Or I guess Jupiter was tin. Okay? So things like that. So what we would call herbalism, they would have called magic. Herbs have particular characteristics, and that by sympathetic magic, you take that herb, you get that characteristic into you. And it could be healing or it could be poison. Okay? So certain herbs cause bad things, certain herbs cause good things. They would say that's magic, and we would say that's science, right? I mean, you know, you drink or take antibiotics, it cures your bacteria. They'd say you take antibiotics, it drives out the demon of bacteria. You know, we say we have germ theory to explain illness. They had demon theory. Germs, invisible things, demons, invisible things. You know, take the drink and you're better. Take the drink, you're better. I mean, that's kind of how they viewed it. Now, these ancient magical practices were just a part of pagan religion. Everybody believed in it. Now, everybody didn't practice it. Well, actually, a lot of the elites didn't believe it. They thought it was nonsense. But not everybody practiced it, and there was bad magic and good magic. That is, bad things that you could do, like trying to kill people or curse them or stuff. But it was part of paganism. And that's basically the main way in which paganism survived. It survived as magical practices. Now, neo-pagan movements in the 20th century have kind of tried to restore paganism based on books and literature, but I mean the actual survival of pagan beliefs and practices is generally based on magic. Not all magic is pagan in origin, but that's how it survived the collapse of paganism in the 5th, 6th centuries when it was basically disappeared. Did you have a...
Yeah, so like in the New Testament it talks about like the evils of sorcery and magic. What they're probably talking about is pagan practices.
Yes, the rabbis, there's a whole bunch of Jewish magic, and we'll talk about this later, and the rabbis, some magic is good and some magic is bad, right?
And that's not like their definition of priesthood, it's like separate, it's like magic.
Yes.
When the rabbis do it. Oh, that's interesting.
Because the rabbis weren't priests, right?
Oh, because they weren't Levites.
Now some were, but some weren't.
Okay.
But when you look at Jesus, what do the Pharisees and his opponents say about him? He's a magician, right? He drives out demons by the power of Satan, by Beelzebub, right? He's a spirit master, and he can, I mean, that's what they're saying about him, that he controls demons because he's in league with them. He's in league with Baal, or Beelzebub they called him, but that's Baal, the Canaanite god, or Zeus, it would be the equivalent of Zeus. And he can then command the other demons to obey him because he's got that power. You see what I mean? And there's actually rabbinic tales about Jesus going to Egypt and getting, cutting his skin and putting inscriptions with secret knowledge in it so his hands would be powerful, and learning the secret name of God so he could say it and blaspheme it and stuff. Now, there's all sorts of, these are like 500 years later, rabbis saying things about Jesus. Here's some books. These are primary sources collections, and these are secondary sources on ancient Greek and Latin magic. I'll get you a book on Jewish magic later, but we'll discuss that when we talk about Judaism in the coming discussions. Now, questions on any of that stuff? All right, let's take a look now at astrology and alchemy. Those are the last two topics that we want to try to deal with. Hopefully we'll get them done today, but we might not. Now, anciently there was no distinction between science and magic. Now, people disputed what was true knowledge and false knowledge and what really worked and what didn't work. For example, astrology was widely believed to work, to be true. It was a science. From astrology derives astronomy, that is the modern science. But back then there was no distinction. Anciently, alchemy turns into chemistry, but back then there was no distinction between alchemy and chemistry. People disputed the efficacy of these things, but they didn't view it as something unscientific or unreasonable like people today tend to do. All right? So we have made a clear distinction between occult knowledge and scientific knowledge, back then that distinction was blurred. That's not to say everybody believed in this. Lots of guys thought it was nonsense. A famous example of astrology is Augustine, the famous Christian theologian. In his book on the City of God, can't remember what book, but at any rate, he has a discussion of astrology in which he says it's basically false. He doesn't believe in astrology. And he gives as an example that two different people, both born in the city of Rome, one ends up a slave on the same day at the same moment. They both are born. One ends up a slave, one ends up the emperor. If astrology works, they should have had the same ultimate fate, but one ends up at the bottom, the other one ends up at the top. So this is his argument of why astrology, it just doesn't work. It's practical, pragmatic. Okay, astronomy was viewed, the basic assumption of astrology is that the stars and the planets are gods, and their movements reflect the influence and power of that god coming down to the earth. Okay? Now, the deity of the stars fades away in medieval times in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but the powers of those planets are still believed to be there, even though they're no longer considered gods. But the original idea is the planet Jupiter is a god. When it's in the ascendant, his power is stronger on the earth, and if you're born in that period, you'll have Jovian characteristics. And we still have adjectives to describe the, like mercurial is a guy who's born under Mercury. And venereal or venal is a guy who's born under Venus. He's oversexed or whatever. And Mars is martial, right? We have these terms, jovial for Jove or Jupiter, and saturnine for Saturn, and so forth. So we still, they're kind of archaic adjectives now, but back in the day, these were major adjectives. So, your birth horoscope is understanding the time of when you were born and what influences were there upon you. And then another aspect of this is doing things, doing practical things. You want to do them at a time when the astrological powers that are particular that you want are at the ascendant, and then you'll have more success. So when you want to go to war, you want Mars in the ascendant, or you want the right alignment of the stars. So you'd have an astrologer, and he'd tell you, well, this week's bad for winning victory, but next week's going to be great. So we'll hold off the siege till next week, and then you'll have higher chance of success. Or have your coronation when the powers of Jupiter are at the ascendant, because he's the king of the gods, and that's the power of Jupiter's power is that of royalty and governance. You see what I mean? So you'd want to have your coronation at a time when Jupiter's power is strong. Somebody have a hand up? Yeah.
Yes. What is Saturnine? I've never heard that.
Kind of grim and, unhappy or mean or that type of thing. Okay. Now, astronomy is also can be omens. That is to say, changes in the heavens. Essentially, what you have is a geocentric Earth. Out here in the heavens, the gods are running around doing things. You will see them doing something that takes some time to get down to Earth, and then it will impact the Earth. So by watching the heavens, you can kind of predict what's going to happen on the Earth, because you can see it up there before the power, before the impact of that reaches the Earth. And for example, comets were a big deal, because comets are changes, unique events in the heavens that aren't predictable. Now, comets, in fact, are predictable, but they basically didn't have enough, at least in ancient, they didn't have enough data to figure out the predictable patterns of comets. So from their perspective, they just couldn't predict them. So a comet represents a major change in the heavens, like a new star or a new god comes in, and that means either the death of a king or the rise of a new powerful king. That is, the death of the old king, who used to be there because the new comet, a new star has come, or, and then the rise of a new king. So, for example, at Julius Caesar's death, there was a comet, and it was viewed as a sign, a divination of the future. So you would use the heavens and heavenly signs as astral omens to foretell the future. What sign you were born, what god you were born under determined kind of what your future would be. What you tried to do at a particular time would be benefited by, doing it at the time when whatever powers were ascended that you wanted to obtain. Is that clear to everybody? Now, what this required, well, what it assumed is geocentricity, which we've already talked about, right? It also assumes lots of observation of the heavens and determining the patterns and the times and the changes and stuff. This, in practical terms, meant doing observational astronomy. In practical terms, however, it was also non-mathematical astronomy. That is, it tended to be described in poetic language rather than mathematical language. So we would describe, modern science describes astronomical phenomenon based on mathematical formula, right? You'll get complex mathematics to describe the ellipse of Mars around the sun or something. Okay. Back then, it was much more poetic. Now, the astral influence is basically a natural phenomenon. And the most obvious example of that was the moon. The moon caused tides. And the sun was another obvious example. The sun caused warmth. It caused life. It caused prosperity. So, I mean, there were observable empirical evidence that the astronomical phenomenon impacted the Earth, largely from the moon and the sun, and then it was more of an assumption on the other planets. The tides are a classic astrological example of the impact of the moon. But it would also be associated with female periods, and at least they assumed there was some connection with that, and also with lunacy. Lunacy being under the influence of Luna, the madness, okay? So some of these were empirical and some of them were assumptions. Okay? We already talked about the heavens as gods and how their movements and changes can foretell what their plans are going to be. Now, it helped to have spirits who went up to the gods and could listen in or eavesdrop on them to come down and tell you as well. So you would mix spirit magic with astrology a lot to get kind of more clear information. Because a lot of times, all you know is that a great empire will fall. Okay, the astrological signs indicate a great empire will fall. That's very unhelpful, because which empire is it, right? Is it mine? Is it his? So it's a king will die. Well, there's 50 kings in the world. Which king is going to be? That type of stuff. We've talked about horoscopes. I don't think we mentioned the term, but horoscope is a visual representation of the heavens at the moment of your birth. So it establishes what astrological influences were there when you were born, and therefore kind of what your future is going to be, because you have more power from Jove or Jupiter than you do from Mars, or vice versa. These things won't. Generally, the astrologers would not say it determines your future, but it influences your future. Now, a lot of astrologers were fatalists, believing that it was all predetermined. But others were not fatalists. They believed that if you learned this information, you could act on it and thereby maximize or avoid whatever was coming, depending on whether it was good or bad. And there's lots of stories told about astrologers. The most famous one probably is about Tiberius, the emperor. Tiberius was the stepson of Augustus, and Augustus's direct descendants died in various circumstances. But, and if you want to read a great fictionalized version of this, read Robert Graves' I, Claudius, and Claudius the God. Those are really fun novels about this period. But at any rate, Tiberius was banished by Augustus to an island because he was, being a jerk or whatever. He was there on this island and he had an astrologer with him. The astrologer predicted that at this day or month or whatever, you will be called back to Rome. And it worked. It happened. A boat came in, he was called back to Rome, restored to favor, and eventually became emperor. So Tiberius kept that astrologer with him for the rest of his reign because he really believed this guy could foretell the future. Okay? So, I mean, this is like, in a sense, it's like the gambler's assumption that there's something like luck and you can, maximize your luck, or the dice are hot or whatever. There's enough winners in gambling to make people on anecdotal evidence believe in it. Do you see what I mean? And it's the same with astrology. I mean, if you have 10 astrologers and they're predicting different things, one of them's going to be right, and then astrology is proven true, right? Now, if you run a statistical analysis on it, you'll see that, there's variance and variables, and in fact, it's, the probability is probably the same as guessing. But, there was enough anecdotal success of astrologers to lead lots of people to believe in it. And it's also cherry picking. You pick the successes and ignore the failures of astrologers. Now, astrology was also believed to be an art, not necessarily a science. So a good astrologer could interpret the evidence better than a bad astrologer. And so the guys who fail were bad astrologers, right? The guy who gets it right, he's the good astrologer. There's zodiacs and planets and decans. These are different. These are collections, clusters of stars. These are the moving stars, which we now call planets, but planetes means wanderers. These are the moving stars. And then decans are other constellations. There's 3, or there's 30 of them in the heavens. And, so there's a whole sequence of different star clusters that they believed affected this. Now, the zodiac, in fact, defines a zone through which the stars and the sun and the moon move. So it's not all constellations, it's those in which the other planets are moving. It has to do with the tilt of the Earth and different things. But so they were of crucial importance because they would correlate then with the sun, the moon, the stars, and so forth at different times. We've talked about divination by astrology, and astrology and medicine is basically where you get astrology and it's like, the British would go to the baths at Bath and soak in the warm water to get over rheumatism or something. So you'll read in Jane Austen novels that they go to Bath and they sit around, soak in the pools. It was the same thing, that there was healing influence from planets and stars in certain times and places. And so if you wanted to be healed, you might go out on a certain time of day or a certain day or a certain place, and the healing influences would be improved. And then astrology would also affect magical things, like I think we talked about before. Now, astrology was accepted by many, most probably rejected by many, especially the intellectuals. And it impacts then Jewish, medieval, Muslim, and Renaissance scholars. These are, the smartest and most informed people of the age. Many of them believed in astrology. Most kings had court astrologers. Okay? Queen Elizabeth is most famous for her interest in astrology, and she had John Dee, that magician guy we talked about. He was her court astrologer. Now, a huge crisis occurs. Two crises occur in the conceptualization of astrology. One is that the stars cease to be gods and become just stars. Now, the idea was that, Jupiter is not a god, but it's still a planet that can have the influences that used to be falsely attributed to Jupiter. I mean, to a god, now it's just in the natural order of the heavens that, there's that influence. So the first crisis of the de-deification of the stars in the heavens was resolved for astrologers by the claim that the power is there, even though the Greeks just mistook it for a god, but it's still a power, even though it's not a god. Does that make sense? So they kind of resolved that one. The second big problem for astrology was the breakdown of heliocentricity. That is the breakdown of geocentricity and the rise of heliocentricity. The problem there is, if the Earth is under all the other stars in these spheres, then the influences all go down to the Earth. I mean, that makes sense. But if the sun's the center and all the planets are resolving, then Mars might be over here behind the sun when you're over here, and its astrological influence just doesn't work that way. Do you see what I mean? So it caused a big crisis for astrologers, and basically it ceased to be a dominant cultural assumption after that. Now, that's not to say astrology is still not around. I mean, most of you probably know what your birth sign is, right? Yeah. That's astrology, right? You were born under a sign that will give you certain influence. And if, I don't know, you know, if each sign has a gem associated with a crystal, right? And the astrologer will tell you on this day, Sagittarius, this is not good for Sagittarius to make a business deal or something, if you're Sagittarius. But it's okay if you're Leo or something, right? I don't know if you've paid any attention to that. But it's still going on today. So it's still going strong in many ways.
It's in the newspaper, like every newspaper ever.
Right. And it's the New Age guys are all into this astrology stuff. Okay, here's some books, bibliography, if you want to follow this. Get more information on that. The next topic is alchemy, but I think, since we only have a minute left, I think we'll just stop there, and we're still half a period behind, not that far, maybe 15 minutes behind, but we will pick up on philosophical esotericism next time, and then move on to Judaism, Jewish mysticism. So we'll see you on Friday.
So on my mission, a woman called us to curse us.
Really?
Yeah, we got legitimately cursed. Like,
By whom?
I think she has schizophrenia or something.
Yeah.
Like that, because she's pretty out there. Essentially, but she was once baptized and reverted to Catholicism.
Oh.
And she could get going. And I was just like, well, dang, we're in a bad spot now.
So,